There's also data to show that those same faculty are the ones that are more likely to use high-impact practices, more engaged, active, and collaborative learning practices in the classroom, which then has an impact on the students' success. So is this work then integrated with other institutional priorities like the retention and success of our students? And if it's not, then it's really not going to make the kind of change. That's what Melvin Johnson is getting at. Deep, pervasive, and integrated. We need to begin to think about how we bring these institutional priorities together, because they aren't separate. They are very much connected to one another. So that's the integrated piece. Now, another way to think about the Carnegie, go ahead.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Well, Shawnee's, can I?
Oh, yes, sir.
I'm going to ask, John, why don't you finish, because we're going to have a period of
Okay.
questions and dialogue. So if you sort of
I'll
wrap
table.
up.
Yeah. All right. As you can see, I could probably do this for the next 3 or 4 hours. All right, I'm going to just stop here and then we'll stop. So if you look at the Carnegie data and try to make sense out of it, who has the classification? There's 311 campuses now that have the classification from 3 rounds of the classification. Right? How do you make sense out of it? And we've tried to disaggregate this in all sorts of ways, by size, by Carnegie basic classification, by residential, non-residential, all sorts of ways. Right? And we couldn't come up with anything that worked. But then we looked at this one category, which is being an ASCU campus. What's an ASCU campus? American Association of State Colleges and Universities, the public state colleges and universities. And consistently, over the 3 years, a third of the campuses get the classification. Or a third of the classified campuses are ASCII campuses. You can't say that about any other way to slice the data. So what's going on? Well, one thing about ASCII campuses, and by the way, Cleveland State is an ASCII campus, a very typical ASCII campus, is that they have this characteristic of being a steward of place. What does it mean to be a steward of place? Well, if you talk to someone at an ASCII campus, they'll say things like, it is our responsibility to prepare the future citizens and civic leaders of our community. That's what we do. That's what it means to be a steward of place. It also means that the institution is fundamental to the locality and region that it's in. It would be devastating if the campus left, for all sorts of civic and economic and other reasons. Right? That's sort of a good way to think about who you are. Another part about being a steward of place, which is different than what David Moras was talking about when he was talking about anchor institutions, because you are also an anchor institution, you're core to this community, you're not going anywhere. Corporations, they come and go, but you're staying, right? You're an anchor. Many anchor institutions are not stewards of place in the sense that at a Cleveland State University, the students that come here for the most part will go back into the locality and region. Other anchor institutions, which really claim an identity and are wonderful as anchor institutions, think of places like University of Pennsylvania, right, or Syracuse University. They claim this identity as an anchor institution. The students that go there don't come from the local community, and they don't go back to the local community. That's what's different about being a steward of place. So that's part of the way to think about what this means for a place like Cleveland State University. Right? What does it mean to be, and enact, operationalize a steward of place? And you'll see everything we're not going to talk about. All right, and then back to the question. But anyway, I'll leave it.
No, I just, well, so I want to do, because I can sense there's, we really want to dive in, and I can imagine some of those slides we want to get to.
Okay.
So I don't want to do that. So I want to, usually we've had, and everybody I think in the room has done this, we've had conversations at the table. But because I think there's real back and forth here that's of value, let me just do this very quickly. I'm going to ask Jessica to capture this. Just very quickly, just around the room, just to check in with you. So rather than ask a question, what right now are highlights of what folks in the room may be thinking as especially those of you who have been listening throughout this, this notion of the institution's transformation, I think it's very interesting. You know, up till now, a lot of the conversation is the impact externally. And what you've been pointing us to is, well, what is the transformation institutionally, internally? And so just to capture a handful of thoughts that may be emerging very briefly. Anybody who, yes?
Absolutely, engagement as a core value. When you talk about engagement as a core value in the university, and I kind of going back to the Johnson model of integration, I'm particularly interested in how we develop, promote, and then assess engagement as a core value of our departments, because that's who we are as an institution, particularly at the level of faculty, but at the level of department, not administration.
Mm-hmm.
Thank goodness we have Dr. White, but departments, faculty, tenured faculty, herding cats. we know that analogy. How do we then bring ourselves together as faculty in departments to contribute to engagement as a core value for the university as a whole? I think that's a huge problem here at Cleveland.
So John, hang on to that assessment at the department, faculty-driven level. Any other thoughts top of mind that have emerged? Go ahead.
Jay, I have a question, but I'm not going to ask it. But top thoughts that are top of mind from this presentation would be with regard to a huge amount of work with regard to cultural change within an institution to be able to shift the thinking to this approach. Almost a bit overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
but sounds worth it. Sounds like it's worth it, because I was looking for the correlation, because we talked about impact in the community, and I'm from a community college, and what our focus in, you talk about the fact that everyone's shifting their thought process with focusing on outcomes. So are the legislators, and they want to know, how are we getting students in? And being that that's the focus of our work right now, I wanted to hear how community engagement, I know there's tons of data that supports student outcomes, and I wanted to hear that out of your mouth, and you said that, but so a lot of things affect retention, a lot of things affect student outcomes, but why is this one so important?
So is that that's the question you were, okay. So good, so that connection to outcomes, particularly the ones we're having to pay attention to right now, completion and retention. Dr. Pratt?
The word that sticks out for me is reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious about what that looks like and how you actually execute, because the culture change is really bigger than the institution. If there's going to be reciprocity with the community, there's going to have to be cultural change in the community as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems to me that reciprocity might be an instrument that helps that to occur. I just don't know how that happens. I don't know what that looks like. So I'm really curious to know more about that.
That's good. That's good. Well, Dan, let's get.
One of the things that struck me, John, that is sort of an economics argument or behavioral change argument, that if you're not incentivizing it, you may as well be disincentivizing it, because there are all of these competing incentives for tenure, for publishing for tenure, for whatever. So it does, and that can only come through structural, institutional change. It can be a catalyst for more change, but it can also only come from the institution. It can't happen at the individual faculty level.
Yeah, it's good.
That means you have work to do.
Yes, well, not alone though. Dr. Jones.
Yes, I have, I guess, two sort of interrelated questions. One is regarding cultural change and where that emanates from within the hierarchy or structure of an organization. Top down, bottom up, somewhere in the middle. What kind of processes do you utilize to pursue that cultural change? And then the other question kind of relates to timing and what might be going on at a university at any given point in time that might facilitate sort of the transformation and cultural change. For example, as you may know, we're undergoing this 43 conversion process, which is somewhat major in terms of the time commitments and the demands that it's putting on certain people. Would this be a good time to try to incorporate or integrate the notion of engagement, or should it be kind of pursued separately or in a parallel way? How do you integrate all those things to be? Is this an opportunity or a bad time? I guess would be the
So
question.
John, why don't you answer everyone in a minute? But well, come back up, and I think your big picture, a lot around this culture change, from where it emanates, how it connects to big initiatives, how it is embedded on the ground, how you make those connections institutionally, but then a little bit also about outcomes, relevant institutional outcomes, and then this notion of reciprocity, the role of community. I mean, sort of captures, and if it takes us back to some of the slides we made. That's fine.
All right, so the first thing I would say is that to engage in this process of transformation, you have to start with these conversations. Right? So this is exactly the kind of thing that needs to happen. You need to put the really hard things out on the table and begin to grapple with them, because everything that you just talked about is one of these really hard things, right? So starting with the departments, you're absolutely right. If this isn't owned by the departments, which is where faculty culture lives, it's not going anywhere, right? So it's got to be driven to the departmental level.
Jeff, you can move the mic a little.
Oh, yeah. So how does that happen? Well, it can happen at different places differently. I can give you some examples, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen that way here. So a place like University of North Carolina at Greensboro, from my experience, they are probably one of the best examples right now of actually being able to look at what do department level guidelines and criteria actually look like. Because in 2008, they revised their campus-wide guidelines to specifically articulate rewards for community engagement in teaching, in research, and in service, right? And to set out a set of criteria. But then the next part was a charge to all of the departments to come up with their own, and essentially take the institutional-wide criteria and translate it down to the department level. So that was 2008. I would say, I've seen some of these. I'm guessing maybe there's somewhere between 6 and a dozen campus departments that have pulled it off. So it's hard. It's really hard. But it also begins to provide us with some really good examples, right? So that's one place to look. The other part is to just think about what's being driven out of your discipline. Because in many disciplines, the same thing that we're talking about at the institutional level is happening at the disciplinary level. Right? Questions about a different way to think about knowledge in the discipline so that it actually has an impact on the society. Right? So what's happening in your discipline? You could ask that in all of yours. And I always fundamentally start with the question of what's the public relevance of your discipline? And if you can begin to grapple with that, you can begin to work your way into then how do we approach that? Okay?
I need to say, and for some it's particularly challenging because I am in a discipline, English literature, that does not want to make itself accessible to the public. It would be fine with us if we then remained in the old school for those people who are truly interested in deep structure, archival research, and knowledge for a few.
Right.
So it's, and I'm not taking away from that, but I really do appreciate that because I teach African American literature. I do what you're talking about just in
right.
light of my discipline.
Right.
At the same time, because I'm not focused on publishing literary scholarship, but doing more community-based local work, that's not, I don't quite know where I fit in. So I thank you, because that is a good point of departure for me in terms of making this assessment and engagement as a core value, not something that we offer or embrace rhetorically, but in reality as
Yeah.
well.
Right.
Thank you.
So let me see if I can segue that into a couple of different places. And I am going to go find a slide here. So in thinking about kind of creating a culture of engagement on the campus, and this goes in part to what you were talking about, but it is intended to partly take us to a different conversation. To get at this question of policies, there needs to be a number of things in place, right? So one is that there needs to be a clear understanding of what it is we're talking about.